So my first question to the panel is, what are the cybersecurity threats faced by business and citizens today? Ant, would you like to lead off?
Yeah, sure. Is it okay? Anybody hear me?
I can.
Okay, then it's fine. So yeah, I think if you talk about threats, that threat landscape is changing all the time. It's really hard to prioritize things. So I think in future we need to focus on scenarios and certain types of businesses. We can't just look at it as a whole from a holistic approach. I think it's, as I said, we have IoT on one side, you have loads of different trends from ransomware, identity theft. So it's really hard. If you look at it from a defensive perspective, and if we try to look at this as a whole, I think it leads to information overload. And I think that the future brings specific profiling and scenarios that we need to focus on threats. But if you need to mention a few that are definitely still top threats that citizens and businesses are facing, I would definitely say that malware is on top of that list, and advanced persistent threats, because it's harder and harder to face these threats through any signature-based mechanisms. Behavioral analysis is not on that level yet where we can actually protect businesses and citizens.
Good. Will, do you think there's enough done for citizens, to make them aware of the threats?
I think they're growing more and more aware of it. It's very hard to pick up a newspaper today and not read about something to do with some sort of cyber threat. I still think there's a big gap, though, between them being aware of something bad is happening and that they're at risk, and actually then being able to do anything effective to protect themselves and prevent that from happening. So I think awareness is there, but what we need to now move is to actually finding ways that they can actually protect themselves and be safe and capitalise on the internet in the way that they want to.
Aaron, would you like to tell us that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things Ante mentioned is with the Internet of Things, and one of the big threats for systems going forward is the desire that we want to introduce more of these products into our homes. And you know, we've got cameras, we've got fridges, we've got washing machines, we've got everything that's going to be connected to the internet soon. And businesses have to ensure that these things are secure before they even leave and get sold. I think where the kind of gaps are at the moment is there's not this understanding of who's responsible. If there's a cyber attack that happens to me at home because of somebody else's product, is that my fault for not securing it, or should they have done the work first? I think that's a big threat.
Mark?
It's interesting hearing the panel talk. I guess one of the things that we see a lot, particularly in government, is that actually the biggest threats are kind of the ones that are at scale. So malware is a good example, but it's really about most threats are high volume and low sophistication, which actually means that translating from kind of awareness into behavior change, although it's a difficult thing to do, is absolutely what we need to focus on. Because the majority, around 80% of attacks, can actually be stopped if people just do the basics right. And that's really what it comes down to. So, you know, the massive campaigns that we run for public around cyber aware, using our kind of best insight that we have from GCHQ or our new National Cybersecurity Centre, it's just about translating that into what are the kind of really simple actions that you can take as an individual or a business to protect your networks and to protect your stuff. And that's about using strong passwords, using different passwords, using password managers, making sure that when that thing pops up on your phone or your computer says, do you want to update now? You go, yes, because often there are security patches involved in that. And that's a real challenge, because at the end of the day, most attacks aren't the high-end, sophisticated kind of nation-state-sponsored ones. They are opportunist in nature. And all you have to do is look at TalkTalk, and TalkTalk is that kind of great public example that we have in this country. That wasn't a massive targeted attack. That was a teenager scanning for vulnerabilities randomly on the internet who stumbled across a server and was able to use an attack in a way. The attack is actually older than he was. So it's not as if it was a new thing that something couldn't have been done about if only the vigilance was there.
I mean, what we're all saying in that issue is a lot of it is common sense. And we could invest vast sums of money at the lower level to protect a threat which is not that really big. Yeah. The people I worry about is, old codgers like myself, the elderly population. who get ripped off very quickly because they don't know about the threats. And there's a challenge for not just government, but for citizens themselves to protect the elderly. I mean, in your comments there, Mark, you did address my next question, which what are the best practices that should be adopted to respond to today's cyber threats? I mean, Cyber Essentials has been a great success.
Yeah.
I remember being part of the industry consultation period when people were talking, oh, let's have 27,001 as, the thing for everybody. Well, SMEs can't afford that. What's the take-up been like?
I would say good. I would say we can do more. I mean, it's to your point really about we need to do a lot more work to just demystify this. Cybersecurity is one of these kind of really scary things that everyone thinks is over there. In my part of Cabinet Office, I'm a kind of separate part of the rest of government. Now, I sit in Cabinet Office, which helps because that means I can kind of have that span of control, but also that kind of visibility. But my job, frankly, is to embed it in every single public servant's jobs. And so they understand it in the same way that it's our collective job to embed it in everybody who's in the workforce. We need a more cyber-capable workforce, as well as a kind of, I'm sure we'll come on to skills and kind of that kind of pipeline of kind of high-end talent. Cyber Essentials is great because it is just about those kind of for time-pressed, time-poor, understanding-poor small businesses. It's about the simple things that you can do. But it's also equally applicable to large businesses too, because it's the same sorts of basic principles that need to be followed, subject to kind of board level, actually understanding what it is that the risks that they're facing and investing properly. But it's also about supplying, kind of helping secure their supply chains too. So there's incentives all round. We just need to do more kind of in partnership with others to kind of get that message out.
You've touched a very important issue there, the supply chain. Because if there's a security break in the supply chain, it could have disastrous effects and affect the well-being, the economic well-being of our industry at the higher level. Will, what have you got to say on this aspect?
So I think you're absolutely right. I think the supply chain is a huge issue. I think if you look at a lot of the major attacks that we've seen over the past 3 or 4 years, the end victim hasn't been the initial person attacked. They've nearly always been somebody's found a weak link in their supply chain who, for some reason, whether legitimate or not, has quite extensive access into the end target's network. You breach a small company, use that access to then pivot into the main one. So I think Mark's absolutely right. There is a responsibility for everybody to kind of understand that and push that down. I think in broader terms, that kind of level of understanding, I think it's quite analogous to the way that health and safety kind of culture was very different 30, 40 years ago. And now you wouldn't imagine walking past a building site without seeing nearly everybody on there in the right personal protective equipment, high-vis jackets, hard hats, things like that. And I think a lot of Cyber Essentials is almost the sort of online equivalent of that we just need to get people used to doing those kind of things and acting safely. And I think that takes away a huge amount of that high volume, low sophistication. I think when you move away from end user, home user type environments, I do think that the story is a little bit different when you start looking at businesses and larger enterprises, because then, as Ant says, that's where you do start to see more of a targeted attack, whether that is just organised criminals understanding that an enterprise is somewhere that's going to have a large number of computers that will have an economic value to them, and so if they can infect them with ransomware like Silvio was talking about and extort money out of them, that's a pretty effective criminal enterprise that you can run that's quite low risk to you if that's the kind of business that you're in, is stealing from people. So I think then when we get into that, then there is another area, and perhaps Cyber Essentials is still absolutely vital to sit there as the foundation, but there may be other things that you then need to build on as you get into a larger, more attractive target for criminals and nation states and other threat actors that we might talk about.
So you and Ant are both members of industry, not government. I've got government on my right-hand side, deliberately. Do you think government's doing enough to provide the wherewithal to respond to today's threats?
Personally, I do. I think UK enterprise, as a UK PLC, as a group of businesses, has to take a level of responsibility for itself. Yeah. And cyber risk is really is not unlike any other risk. And as a business, and as a senior person in the business, as a board member, you have to understand the risks that your business has and respond and manage them appropriately. Whether that's investment risk for a bank, whether that's cyber risk for anybody that's using any kind of technology. It's incumbent upon you to run your business in a responsible way. So I don't really think that it's massively the role of government to start dictating how we do these things. I think it does a great job in terms of awareness and education and taking, obviously, the masses of knowledge that UK government has through CSG and things like that, and helping people understand it. But I don't think it should be going any further than that, really, in the private sector.
Yeah. Mark, would you like to respond to that?
No, I mean, I think that's right. I think it is, we can use all of our best insight and knowledge and expertise that we have in government and share it as much as we can. But it is about working in partnership. It has to be. The danger we would always have if we wanted, I mean, health and safety is an interesting one because if you take that to its logical conclusion, part of the way that we've driven lots of changes in health and safety is regulatory. And actually, this is probably an area that we don't want to regulate because what that can do is act against that more mature way of managing a risk, particularly at board level. Because if you do it in a kind of tick box compliant sort of way, you will get a full sense of security. The board will go, okay, have we done these 5 things? Great, we've ticked those off. That means we're great, aren't we? And we've spent the money and then that's it. And of course the threat evolves. So you may be fine on a Tuesday, by Friday, you may have a whole new different set of threat vectors. So things that we do like the cyber information security, the sharing partnership that we have. Now that's a safe and secure way of all industries in all sectors to be able to come together privately and talk about the threats that they're facing. Government is an actor in that, talking about the things that we're seeing, and that's about collective responses to what we can do to stop the threats that we're seeing in real time.
Lovely.
Can I just... what I would say is I think you're absolutely right. I don't necessarily think that legislation needs to be prescriptive in what the protective or controls that people need to have. I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, as part of the government's remit, is to say people have a responsibility to do this. If they don't discharge that responsibility appropriately, then there is a comeback to them.
Yeah.
But I don't think that necessarily translates into having to be a checkbox. And that's not how we manage risk in anything else, right? If you don't say to somebody you were wearing a seatbelt but you still were drunk, therefore you've ticked the box there and you're okay. So there is an element of, I think we could still come back. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing in certainly personal data with GDPR coming through, where we are saying, look, you just need, if you're going to handle people's data, you've got to do it responsibility. You've got to manage that risk for them. And if you don't, there can be quite a severe consequence for you through legal recourse for people. So I take your point, but I do think there is a role that we could still play and say, no, we are going to, a bit like Aaron was saying, we are going to make sure that accountability is clear. And if people aren't discharging that accountability properly, then there'll be some kind of comeuppance for them.
Nice. It's having a balanced security risk framework.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. So, Aaron, you belong to an organisation that has lots of responsibilities for protecting top secret down to restricted. How much of the problem that we've talked about relates to a skills shortage, and what has been done or can be done to address this? Is hiring convicted hackers an acceptable response?
I think one of the things that I've found in terms of my project is about changing the way we do business with our suppliers in the Ministry of Defence. So one of the things that I've introduced in MOD is a new policy around every project manager, every commercial member of staff must now complete a cyber risk assessment when they then want to tender out a contract. One of the things we're coming across is unless it's structured in the right way, this risk assessment, and there's no subjectivity, the people who are completing these risk assessments don't have the skills to make that decision. Until we get to a point where everyone's aware of the cyber risk and can make an informed decision around these things, we have to put some more structure in place to allow all members of staff to access that, whether that's a front door service from a central security team who can provide advice to members of staff, or another route such as training on the internet, etc. One of the things is just remembering a story is that I used to work for HMRC, and they did a massive campaign to raise awareness on phishing. And what that involved was sending internal emails to members of staff to see if people clicked on links. And unfortunately, I did. It was an offer of 20% off flowers for HMRC employees. And I clicked on it, and it came up with like an awareness thing. And there are proactive things businesses can do to raise awareness. And I think we should encourage that more. In terms of hiring convicted hackers, I think in any sense of employment decisions on hiring somebody with a criminal history, it's you take on that risk of choosing to employ that person. The government or the law doesn't say that you can't employ unless it's a specific conviction when you're working with adults and children. So it's up to you as a business if that's the approach you want to take. There's great skills of people who are younger, who've grew up on the internet with the internet and have developed these skills in different ways than just going to university and reading a script or reading the old stuff that are written in books. People who've done this themselves can probably defend you or give you a lot of insight as well.
Well, you can form your own judgment. The next two speakers after this session are ex-convicted criminals, but now making a valued contribution to industry. So moving on, how can business ensure training and education, and how should an organisational approach to cybersecurity work? And
yeah, so again, that's a quite wide topic. I think training and education needs to obviously come from the top, and like everything, it's always the most important thing is to get the business buy-in. That goes on top of this skill shortage, which is definitely one of the reasons why we ended up where we are now, is because we were treating InfoSec as a specific department that does something. I think that was the biggest mistake, and there was a lack of communication and education, awareness in the past, and that's something we need to work on, definitely, if we want to change that. I always like to compare InfoSec with sort of an agile. It should be a culture. It should be spread across the organization, something like HR. If you walk into the office, I'm looking at it from a business perspective, obviously. If you go to the office and you see HR sitting in a glass box, isolated, how can they help people? They can't interact with them. So I think exactly the same thing is with security. Security needs to be everywhere. It needs to be integrated into every single process, and it needs to be business specific, which is really important. You can't reuse same frameworks and same models as you move from one organization to another. Every business is specific, every business is different, so it's really important that we adopt the processes and re-engineer them in a way so they fit into this business. And yeah, I mean, all the questions are correlated. As we started talking about this, it's quite interesting because, yeah, moving down, you can actually get to the root cause of the issue and why we ended up where we are.
would you like to add to that from an industry perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to training and awareness, we quite often bundle those two together with a sort of ampersand in the middle and treat them as one thing, whereas I think they are very different. And I think, Aaron made some really good points around there. There's an awareness that we need to give every single employee, and in fact every single citizen, as Mark was talking about, things like cyber essentials. When you see the update thing at home, update, change your password, have more than one password, things like that. And just kind of basic awareness of how to go about and navigate modern life where you're interacting with technology all the time. I do think there's also a role for training, and that comes in lots of ways. Again, as Aaron was saying, making sure that people who are in positions to make decisions can understand the risk that they've got, and up to board levels where they can, you don't necessarily need to have your chief exec understanding how to use a SQL injection attack to break into a telco and steal personal data, but you do need to have them understand that the type of business that they do has inherent risks, and what those risks could be and what the impact could be on their business. And so I think there is a level of training that people need as they kind of move to more senior positions in business or in government, where they can actually act in the way that they need to.
Okay. Mark, from a central government perspective, we've seen lots of initiatives in the past from CSG and now from NCSC in this area. Would you like to add to the...
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo what's been said. I mean, the kind of an organisational approach means recognising that security is not an IT issue. It's not just something that goes on over there. And it's not someone else's problem. It's about every single person, no matter what level they are, throughout the organisation, making sure that they recognise that it's their personal responsibility to protect their information, to protect their networks, to protect the core of their business. It's a challenge. It is about kind of this kind of a more cyber-capable workforce, as well as your specialists alongside them to kind of support and guide in the way that an HR partner would within an organisation. But it's also, for me, it's about embedding this kind of culture of continuous improvement. Because this threat isn't static, and it will evolve, and organisations need to evolve with it.
It was interesting. I was looking at some of my past presentations that I gave in the 90s about information assurance, information security. And I have one slide that says security used to be the privilege of a very few people working behind green curtains. Today, it involves everybody. Nobody is exempt from tackling the issue and being responsible for it. Okay, let's move on. I will give you a chance, when I've got rid of a couple more questions, for the audience to pitch in as well. As long as there's a customer data to steal or money to be made, criminals will go online. Is it really possible to deter cyber criminals, as the cyber strategy suggests? And you've heard a lot about threats this morning. Erin, would you like to kick off?
I think it depends where you are, really. I think one thing I can talk about is in terms of the Ministry of Defence is we understand the risk across our supply chain and obviously the threat that comes from foreign agents, these advanced persistent threats that happen probably every day as I'm speaking right now. And we've made a decision to implement a new strategy around that. And one thing I found in terms of, this is through something called the Defence Cyber Protection Partnership, which has existed now for the last 3 years. A couple of years ago, we came up with the cybersecurity model, which are basically our standards that say these are the minimum security features or policies you need to have in place as a business. And that's been, up until now, a recommendation, really, is you know, you can go forward and implement these. What I've found is an approach from MOD is until we've made this a contractual requirement, businesses have had to go, okay, is it worth the money right now? Do I really need to do this? And we've had to make a decision saying, well, you won't get a contract with us unless you implement these standards, depending on the risk level. And you know, that part of that is not deterring, but it's defending and being proactive about securing our supply chain. You know, there's a certain element where we rely on people to do the good thing and meet recommendations to secure UK PLC, but like we said, we've got other ways other than regulations, and MOD have chosen to use a contractual route of securing our supply chain.
I think the big issue here is that cyber is not fit and forget. It's you must nurture it. You must keep on top of it. You should, you know, look at the threats. You could try and extrapolate where the threats are coming from and what new changes. But it's a very, very complex landscape. Very complex, and you can't take your eye off the ball at any time. And so, yeah, the criminals will always be there, the terrorists will always be there, there'll always be somebody wanting your money. And we have to work daily at protecting. Would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think in terms of deterrence specifically, I think that becomes a very economic argument. You know, if you're the reason why we see a lot of organised crime operating on the internet is because at the moment it's very economically attractive for them. It's a very low cost of entry, a low risk of being caught, and has really high returns. So if we can change that dynamic and make it less attractive for them, then it will deter them. So, I mean, we've seen in some of the research that we do, and we did our annual security report a couple of months ago, we're already seeing that as we reduce the time to detect malware that's produced by organised criminals, we're forcing them to decrease their time to evolve. So pieces like malware, like Silvio was talking about, criminals are having to constantly invest to make sure that the threat landscape is dynamic. And that's introducing cost to them. So the more we can do that, the more we can make it difficult for them, then the more of a deterrent it is for them, because it becomes less and less attractive. Now, to do that, I think you're absolutely right. It does need vigilance. It does need people to move quickly. To move quickly, it means that you can't rely on old ways of doing it, on deploying lots and lots of very complex point solutions all around your network to address different things. It means you've got to take a slightly different approach. You've got to start consolidating what you're using, integrating it much, much better, making sure that it can, all the different tools that you've got can talk to each other, and eventually starting to automate that so that as soon as you do detect something, you're able to block it without having to rely on this very constrained resource of humans to make that decision and make configuration changes, because then we can actually continually to try and stay ahead of those that are trying to attack us and just make it really unattractive for them until they'll stop viewing it as low-hanging fruit and move to something else. Yeah. Now, pretty cold comfort if you're the thing that they move to, but from our point of view, that's really where we need to go.
Yeah. One of the challenges we face, of course, and those that have heard me speak before on this subject, is it costs a lot of money to defend. It doesn't cost very much to attack. It costs peanuts. And how we can change that equation, where it costs a lot to attack and not much to defend, that's the utopian world we'd like to move to. Industry might not like that, because it's going to rob them of money, but it's, you know, it is a big challenge.
I think that's right. Sorry, John. Sorry, the only thing I would add is I think that's absolutely right. Raising the cost is just paramount. We need to make the UK a harder target. There is some stuff that we can do in government in terms of leading the way, and certainly in terms of trying to kind of rise it up a level. I mean, it's a bit like we just saw with the Cisco umbrella, but thinking about that on an even greater scale at a national level. If the biggest threat that we've got is this kind of high volume, low sophistication, really cheap tools that are there, how do we make them less effective? Yeah. And we can do that, you know, so things like kind of active cyber defense that we talk about now in our strategy is about kind of that national scale, national level DNS filtering. So all of those known kind of malware bad IP addresses get shared, whether that's from government, whether that's from industry picking it up, whoever it is, we find a way to share that information in real time, so we stop it coming into people's corporate networks and stop people coming in inboxes. One of the things that we try, because we're trying lots of this in government and then saying, look what we've done, is that kind of stopping email spoofing. That's a massive thing, and that has a huge difference. If you employ that on your corporate network or your kind of domains as a whole, on the gov.uk, taxrefund.gov.uk is, of course, a classic one that gets spoofed because everyone goes, ooh, I can get some tax back. We implemented that on the gov.uk domain, and 50,000 emails a day were stopped. So it's that kind of at-scale technique that you can do, which helps redress this kind of mass asymmetry of cost.
Okay, I'm keen on time. We've got 6 or 7 minutes left. Mark, I'm going to give exclusively you the last question, which is, to what extent can the aims of the strategy be achieved?
Okay, so the strategy, which everyone will have read, of course, sets some very stretching, ambitious targets about what we want to achieve. But I would say that overall it's underpinned by one really clear, simple message, that while we will lead the way in government, we cannot do this alone. We need increased and sustained support from industry, from educators, from the third sector. We need increased coordination between government, between industry, between law enforcement. And we need individuals and businesses to be more aware, act responsibly, take responsibility, and make the right choices. And we can only do that if we help them do it. If you're asking my personal view, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because people and businesses get it. They get that in this increasingly digitally connected world that we all inhabit, this is as much about economic prosperity as it is about national security. So in that respect, it's about all of us being as creative and collaborative as we possibly can be in order that we can rise to the challenges that we face.
Okay, straw poll. It's a national cybersecurity strategy, not a government or a defence. It's a national cybersecurity covering the whole of the UK. How many have read the strategy?
We're allowed to vote.
Can I commend the strategy to you, to read it? It's very comprehensive. It'll give you lots of ideas in your own business. It's on the Cabinet Office website, is that right, Mark?
It's just about everywhere we can put it, but yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Read it, please, because reading it will help us all to make the UK a better place to do business. Right, that's the panel's views. I'm happy to take 2 or 3 questions now from the audience. One at the back. There is a microphone somewhere. There it is. Can you pass it to him? Thank you very much.
It's on now.
I was interested in earlier speakers talking about the cyber criminals really operating like businesses and offering customer service and so on. And I'm interested in what your insights are into their business models. How do they segment customers, you know, or how do they segment the market, as it were, to pick out prey? And because the way it sounds like, you know, UK PLC is just a bunch of wilderness wandering across the plain, and there's all these carnivores around, and you just hope the devil takes the hindmost. So is all a cybersecurity strategy can do is make sure that they get someone else and not you? You know, what's your model for what's really going on here?
Mark, would you like to
Well, that's a
kick
good
off?
question. So I'll kick that off really quickly. They are highly sophisticated, of course they are, and they segment their targets accordingly. They will look at the different, they will look at the massive information that we put out there on social media or on corporate websites and use that as a fantastic way of mining who might be good. They will do that kind of bulk approach where it will be literally, they will spread it far and wide and see who comes back. And they will organise themselves in very sophisticated ways. The one thing I would say is that the basics will stop a lot of that. The high-end, very sophisticated attacks take a different type of response, and we've talked about that today. And you know, the job of the National Cybersecurity Centre is to support those sorts of industries that are at much greater risk of attack, understanding what those threats are and how to respond. And of course, our law enforcement capability, we're investing a significant amount in that and doing much more work and working much more closely with our international partners. Because at the end of the day, these are people. And it's serious organised crime, but they're still people with infrastructure, with networks which we can disrupt, which we can take down, and talking about that kind of deterrence, do it in a really public way, which makes, hopefully, a lot of people realise there is a real world impact of the actions that they take.
Thank you. Anybody else? At the front here.
Do the panel have any ideas about what can be measured in security? In business, we like numbers. We like to be able to measure things, what gets measured, what gets measured gets done. Does anybody have any ideas as to how we can monitor and put metrics in place for security?
Aaron.
I think in terms of project I'm working on right now is we're looking at kind of percentage of supply chain coverage of implementing our new policies. It's a challenge we're going to have to address. We're looking at a couple of ways of doing it. I mean, MOD have unique challenges of addressing the supply chain, but I think developing some way of capturing the work that you do. We've developed an online tool for all these risk assessments and supplier assurance questionnaires to be processed through. So that instead of it being an Excel-based kind of back and forth email between individuals, it's captured in one central location and we can view the risks across the supply chain. You know, that's took some sense of proactive development before that we can get there, and it's still a journey that we're going to have to go on. But you know, hopefully we get to a point where we can view the supply chain, every company within it, and see the risk levels of each of the contracts, which would really help when you're going, okay, we've just had this attack, it attacks this vector or this type of company, where do we need to inform, where do we need to speak to, and what do we need to put in place? Yeah.
Thank you. Time for one more short question.
Do you feel that there is enough being done for the micro-nuisance market as the targets move to the weaker prey, the bait fish, if you will, to change the fire and brimstone Old Testament type message of fear into something that can show reward for adopting security?
Well,
Do I have to repeat that with the mic now?
That's good.
Will.
So I think there's been a shift in the last 10 years from what you, I think, accurately describe as that fire and brimstone attitude of security that You know, the world is going to fall apart and everything is terrible. I do think micro businesses, though, do still need to take some responsibility for it. And for the large part, things like Cyber Essentials are probably about where they need to be. And if they can do those things and talk about what they're doing there, I think that does allow them to then demonstrate that they are taking care of the security of the information that they're given and the personal information that they handle. And I think that can then be used as a competitive advantage, for want of a slightly trite term, compared to the other businesses that aren't doing that. I mean, particularly some of the stuff that Aaron's talking about, as organisations get, and not just in government, but I think it's something that we see a lot in private sector as well, organisations start to understand the potential risk that supply chain represents for them and starts to push down that level of assurance and understanding that they need over those risks. I think even at the very smallest of micro businesses, being able to say, no, look, I'm someone that you can trust with information, and I'm not going to be a red dot on that risk register, I'm going to be a green dot, is something that more and more organisations and procurement departments will start to say, that's actually a really good thing, and that means that you're through the next stage and we can now have a conversation about the value you can add beyond that in the services that you offer. So I think as we get more sophisticated and we get a better understanding of what cyber risk is, rather than it's this giant green bogeyman that's going to leap out and murder all of our children, we can actually then start to understand that, and it will be something that we will be able to then start rewarding people that take it seriously with more business and better prosperity.